Okay, so we are on our last journal here, Journal 70. And so today we're going to be talking about some statistics vocab. So some words that we basically use in statistics. We're only going to go over 4 words here. That is population, sample, parameters, and statistics. So let's start out with the first 2. So population is this collection of all measurements that you are analyzing. That keyword there is all the measurements, okay? So I like to think of population as a collection of all the samples. So if this was population, inside of it you would have your sample. So sample, you can think of it as a part of the population or a subset of the population. And then parameters and statistics are talking about the math component of either a population or a sample. So for parameters, it's talking about the characteristics of population. So parameters are connected to population. I like to remember that because of they're both P's, okay? So population and parameters are both connected. So parameters are like when you figure out the mean, the average, the mode, whatever math component that you are doing to the population. Whereas statistics is connected to the sample. And I like to remember that because they both start with S's. So if I were to calculate the mean, the mode, median, whatever I want, with the sample, do stuff to the sample, that is the statistics. Okay, so to give you guys an example of the difference between population and sample. So population, let's pretend that in Norman, I wanted to do a survey in Norman. So I asked the people of Norman to tell me their thoughts on what they thought about Norman Public Schools. So I went around Norman and I asked Norman people on their thought on Norman Public Schools. Do you think it's possible for me to go to every person in Norman and ask their opinion about Norman Public School? Probably not, right? There's a lot of people in Norman, and to hit every person and ask them this question, it's not going to be realistic. So even though the population is every person in Norman, I'm not going to be able to get that data. Instead, what I have to do is get a sample. So what I could possibly do is go to maybe 100 people in Norman and ask their opinion on Norman Public School and gather that data and use that for my statistics. So I wouldn't be able to get a parameter because I can't grab everyone in Norman, so the population, but I can grab the sample and do a statistic. So that's how I can use some of the vocabulary. I hope that gives you a little bit better idea of what is the difference between population and sample. So now we're going to do some example problems using those vocabulary. All right, so here I have a problem where it says that you need to identify the sample versus the population. Okay, so in this example here, it says that NHS surveyed a random sample of 30 of their seniors to see how they felt about the lunch served at the cafeteria. So in this case here, I want you guys to ask yourself, what is the data that we're trying to analyze, or who in here is being analyzed? So here we are surveying the seniors of NHS. So the seniors are the ones being surveyed or being measured. So in this case, the population is the NHS seniors. However, in this case, we did not go to all of the seniors to ask them the question how they felt about the lunch served in the cafeteria. We only went to 30 or sampled only 30 of the seniors. So in this case here, since we're only surveying 30 of them, that's our sample. So the sample is the seniors that were surveyed. Or excuse me, the 30, let me put that in, the 30 seniors that were surveyed, to be more specific. Okay, so let's do some more example problems. All right, so on here, second example, we are going to identify whether something is a parameter versus a statistics. So let's remember that population, when we're analyzing a population, that gives us a parameter, whereas when we're analyzing a sample, that gives us a statistic. So before we can analyze whether something is a parameter or statistics, we need to know if the data came from a population or a sample. So take a read on the first one here. 10% of the U.S. senators voted for the bill. There are 100 U.S. senators. So first ask yourself, did all of the U.S. senators voted for the bill? Now, all the U.S. senators voted in general, is what I'm saying. But only 10% of them said yes to the bill. But the thing is that we care about is whether all 100 senators voted for the bill. So this is the part that gets a little confusing. You want to know if all the senators actually voted. And that's going to be yes, all of them voted, but only 10% of them said yes to the bill. But that doesn't matter. This percentage here is actually there to throw you off. So in actuality, all of the senators voted for the bill here because in this case, we were able to collect that 10% of them voted yes for the bill. So because all of the senators voted, we can say that this came from a population, so this here is a parameter. So this is a parameter because all of the senators voted. Now, they didn't have to vote for this bill, but they did all vote. The second one here, it says 100 people from the OKC reported that the water had a bad taste. So in this scenario, let's first analyze 100 people. Now, last time I checked, OKC has way more than 100 people living in OKC. So this here is really small. So a lot of the times we have to use some common sense here. So this here needed to be a sample. So this here is a sample because there are more people in OKC than there are 100. Actually, let me rewrite this. Let's write it this way. So there are more than 100 people in OKC. That sounds better. So in this case, last but not least, 60% of the U.S. resident agree with the latest healthcare proposal. So this one here is kind of like the first one here, but this time around, think about it. So remember, this percentage here is not telling you that only 60% of the resident voted. This is just saying that 60% of the U.S. Senate agreed on the latest healthcare proposal. 40% of them, I guess, said no to the healthcare proposal. So what I want you to think about here is ask yourself, is it possible for all the people in the United States, so all the U.S. residents in the United States, to go and vote for the healthcare proposal? Probably not, because to make sure that every person in the U.S. went out to vote for the healthcare proposal is really tough. It's really hard to find every person in the U.S. and ask them their opinion on the healthcare proposal. Now, you can get a very big sample size. You can go to a lot of people in the U.S. Or a large number of people, but to get every person in this country to vote, probably not ideal. So in this case here, this is probably just a sample of U.S. citizens, because in this case, it's impossible to get every U.S. resident, let me respell that, resident, to vote. So a lot of the times you have to use a bit of common sense, and we are making an assumption that this here, that not every person in the U.S. was able to go out and vote, just because it's very unlikely that that would have been true. All right, so that's it for Journal 70. So we're going to see some of these problems on the final exam. So we're going to probably do some practice problems with these again in the final review.